It is often said that a good hunter is distinguished not only by bravery, but also by supreme patience. However, does the humble investment of time in search of prey always lead to a positive outcome? And how apparent is the line that runs between the hunter and the predator? The hero of today's tale is Jaghatai Khan, the warhawk who found himself in an alien trap, skillfully set, but who preserved the Imperium as we know it. The little Primarch, snatched from the Emperor's laboratory, was thrown onto the planet of Chogoris. However, as it would later be revealed, fate had intended to send capsule number 5 to Chemos, the barren homeland of Fulgrim the Phoenician. But this was thwarted by mysterious and powerful forces, due to which the Primarchs of the 5th and 3rd Legions found themselves on planets they were not originally destined for. Chogoris, or as it is called in High Gothic Mundus Planius, is a feudal world located in the Ultima Segmentum. The planet had a magnificent nature, lush forests, high mountains and azure seas. However, both before and after its integration into the Imperium, Jaghatai's homeland remained at a primitive technological level of development, showed no aspiration for progress, and barely managed to invent gunpowder. According to the legend recorded in the words of the inhabitants of Chogoris by Horus Lupercal himself, the incubation capsule with the future Great Khan fell on the bank of river where it was discovered by the people of the Talskari. The tribe's leader, Ong Khan, was enchanted by the radiant child and took him into his family as a gift from the gods, naming him Jaghatai. The adoptive father said he saw a fire in the infant's eyes, predicting a fate full of feats. In those days, a large part of the fertile lands of Chogoris was occupied by the Palatine Empire. It had the largest army on the planet, equipped with the best armor and weapons that a pre-industrial culture could create. The soldiers of the Palatine were distinguished by their strict organization and won every battle their ruler sent them into. Another part of Chogoris, consisting of vast steppes, was inhabited by numerous nomadic tribes, engaged in a state of continuous war with each other. These rival peoples, excellent horsemen and archers, fought for resources, control over pastures, or, as their ballads told, to experience the pure joy of battle. The Palatine Empire had no material reasons for invading the steppe territories, but regularly attacked one nomadic tribe or another with the aim of capturing slaves for sacrifices. Ancient texts, preserving memories of the bloody rituals of the Chogorian aristocracy, led imperial historians to conclude that in the past, a cult worshipping the dark gods in one of their countless forms operated on the planet. The remarkable child found by Ong Khan in a short time began to arouse hatred among the other nomadic tribes. It was not only about the obvious might of the young Jaghatai, but also about his mind, which sought to overcome the senseless internecine conflicts. All the Primarchs created by the Emperor reached their physical maturity within the first 10 years of life, and then, in the guise of adult super warriors, typically conquered their home worlds. However, the constant wars raging on Chogoris didn't even afford Jaghatai such a short period. He was forced to first lead an army in the years when he was still a child. The Primarch's adoptive father, Ong Khan, died in an attack by the neighbouring Kurayed tribe. Then Jaghatai, despite his childlike appearance, already being the best warrior of Talskari, gathered an army and went to avenge. The enemy encampment was razed to the ground in a bloody frenzy, killing not only men but also children, women and the elderly. The head of the Kurayed tribe's Khan was placed on a pole in his own tent by the young Jaghatai, so that all who heard this story would remember him as a man mercilessly defending his honor. After that battle, he swore to stop the wars between the tribes, to unite all the steppe peoples, explaining to them that brothers should not fight each other, and to destroy the blood empire of the Palatines. The tribe that had accepted Jaghatai through his efforts soon turned into the Talskari Confederation. The young Primarch carried out hundreds of victorious battles, in which he triumphed not only over other tribes, but also over the hunting squads of the Palatine Empire, something no one had accomplished before him. Jaghatai's army became known as the Mathuli, a Talskari word meaning irresistible force. Mesmerized by his talents and might, groups of warriors voluntarily rallied under the banners of the young commander, unaware that a reformation awaited them ahead. Jaghatai Khan understood that erasing memories of a 1,000-year intertribal war from the fighter's consciousness wouldn't be easy. That meant, inevitably, the units that joined his army would start feuding with others. Therefore, new soldiers were separated from their fellow tribesmen and sent to units where warriors from different peoples served. Thus, the young Khan dismantled in the fighters' minds the previous tribal associations and blood feuds. Soldiers were explained that their loyalty could only belong to the Talskari Confederation, and personally to Jaghatai Khan. The warriors knew that the fair commander promoted only those who honestly achieved success through their own talents, and thus everyone aspired to demonstrate their bravery in battle. Inspired by a common dream of crushing the Palatine Empire, the Mathuli soldiers formed an army exceeding in number the star in the sky of Chogoris. 10 years after the capsule landed on the planet, Jaghatai led his unified people under the banners of Talskari to its annual winter quarters. However, at the mountain pass, a snow avalanche threw the Khan and a small detachment of his warriors into the abyss. A mortal man had no chance of surviving such an ordeal, and therefore the tribe moved on, bidding farewell to their leader in their thoughts. The harsh reality of nomadic life allowed no time for sentimental sorrows over a lost Khan. Under such conditions, any delay would have spelled death for hundreds of thousands of people. As the Talskari had predicted, all the warriors from the group thrown out by the avalanche perished. All but Jaghatai. He came to beneath a thick layer of snow at the mountainside. The Primarch emerged only to be immediately surrounded by a squad of hunters led by the Emperor's son, Palatine. According to the stories, the only one who survived that encounter with the young Khan was a crippled rider, who delivered the severed head of Palatine's heir, as well as news that the nomadic peoples were no longer pawns for bloody rituals. That year, barely had the snows melted when the enraged empire sent its army to Talskari territory. However, they underestimated the military potential of the enemy and did not take into account the combat characteristics of Jaghatai's army. The Palatine led heavily armoured cavalry and infantry armed with smoothbore, muzzle-loading rifles. This was a mistaken decision, as such troops were too sluggish opponents for Jaghatai's soldiers, and thus were almost completely destroyed by the light cavalry of Talskari. The only squad, consisting of the Emperor Palatine and a few of his bodyguards, fled back to the capital. After the triumphant victory, the elders of the united tribes proclaimed Jaghatai the Khan of Khans and the lawful ruler of all his people. Endowed with new status, the Primarch began the conquest of the remaining territories of Chogoris, located on the planet's sole continent. It was then that Jaghatai met the warriors who would become his loyal comrades for life. Hasik, Targutai Yasuge, Chinsha. All of them began to fight under the banner even in those years and subsequently became renowned space marines. Laying siege to enemy cities, the Kagan offered the inhabitants a choice: surrender or die. Most cities wisely surrendered, but the few that rejected a chance at mercy were completely erased from the face of the planet. At the gates of the capital, Jaghatai demanded the head of Emperor Palatine on a pike in exchange for the lives of the townspeople. His wish was fulfilled. The locals themselves invaded the ruler's palace and presented his head to the great Khan, which he, according to tradition, placed at the center of his tent. To the future father of the 5th Legion, it required less than 20 standard years to completely conquer his homeworld. His young empire was born not of a greedy desire to capture new lands or resources, but rather from the dream of the steppe peoples about liberation from the bloody tyranny of the Palatine. Jaghatai Khan proved himself as a talented conqueror and military leader, but despite complete devotion to him from both the highest military ranks and the aristocracy, history did not have a chance to assess the Kagan's administrative abilities and his talents for creating a peaceful existence for his people. As soon as the great Khan's power stretched from ocean to ocean, the Emperor descended upon the planet. Before the discovery of the Primarch, the 5th Space Marine Legion had among its ranks squads known as Discoverers and Pathfinders. These were units travelling to remote corners of the galaxy on reconnaissance missions, but fate had it that Chogoris was discovered by the fleet of Horus Lupercal, accompanying the Emperor before the Pathfinders. The successes of Jaghatai Khan impressed the Master of Mankind, who noted that the found son surpassed some brothers found earlier in achievements. According to imperial records, the Khan joyfully welcomed the father and bent his knee before him with awe-stricken reverence. However, in the journals of the Primarch himself, this event is described differently. For Jaghatai, who by that time had become accustomed to being the most powerful man on the planet and had crushed many enemies, the decision to begin serving another ruler was not easy. And the necessity of bending the knee before the arriving emperor was perceived by the Khan exclusively as a humiliation. From Jaghatai's notes, it follows that accepting the mantle of Primarch, he was guided by his common sense. The Khagan understood that the coming of the emperor to Chogoris was precisely the same ultimatum that Jaghatai himself had set before the besieged cities: join or die. The Primarch made a deal with the father. He bent the knee and entered the service of the emperor, and in return Chogoris remained an untouched world under the protection of the 5th Legion. Furthermore, the battle-loving Jaghatai was undoubtedly attracted to the incredible weaponry of the Imperium, as well as the perspective of endlessly fighting across the expanses of the galaxy instead of the dull administrative governance of a planet. Though it is hard to name another Primarch who loved his homeworld as much as Jaghatai Khan of Chogoris. He ascended to the skies by his father's command, leaving the planet under the management of his trusted general, Jaghatai. Relations with the emperor never became trusting. Jaghatai believed that the father picked favourites among the sons, but unlike other Primarchs, did not fret about it. In his opinion, the ruler of mankind was too secretive. But the father's secrets did not arouse curiosity in the Khan. Jaghatai wished to fight and gain all possible benefits for his homeworld, rather than look for a new family or recognition of merits in the imperial palace, as others did. Upon visiting Terra for the first time, Khagan openly declared to Malkador, the Sigillite, that the imperial truth was a lie. The Primarch could not understand why it was necessary to burn hundreds of worlds and kill priests, if, after bringing planets into compliance, they would still not lead better lives. The Lord Regent understood Jaghatai's anger and explained to him that once the entire galaxy was subjugated to the Emperor, humanity would finally be ready to learn the whole truth about the universe. The fairy tale about a future that would never arrive reminded the Khan of the slavers of Chogoris, who promised to grant people freedom as soon as they were finally ready. Typically, such lies eventually led to an uprising, but the Sigillite responded that such a prospect did not scare him. After all, the Primarchs were created to confront just such situations. In the days when the Imperium found the father of the 5th Legion, the Great Crusade was at the peak of its battles with the mighty Xenos kingdoms and the fallen realms of mankind. Therefore, Jaghatai had no time either for full integration into the culture spread by Terra or for learning the established military doctrines. The Emperor decreed that the conquest of Chogoris was sufficient proof of ability to send the Khan on his own expedition. Most Primarchs did not dare to challenge the decision of the father, and only Robuta Gilliman and Rogel Dawn expressed concerns about it. They assumed that the Khan, who had not mastered the basics of the imperial truth and accepted rules of conquest, would not be able to subjugate worlds properly. The brothers' fears were justified. However, the efficiency and speed of bringing the planets to agreement by the 5th Legion overshadowed any objections. Although the forces available to Jaghatai in the first years of his service to the Emperor could hardly be called a full-fledged legion, the total number of the Khan's sons amounted to 80,000 space marines. However, they were scattered across the galaxy in small companies and rarely assembled in a force of more than 3,000 warriors. At the same time, even the small companies within themselves were divided into separate groups with their own rituals and heraldry. Such squads often fought side by side with warriors from other legions, sometimes already having primarchs, thus adopting foreign habits and rituals. Upon entering the Imperium, Jaghatai Khan was once again faced with the task of uniting many disparate warrior groups unlike each other and making them resemble the warriors carrying the native Primarch culture. By elevating several loyal companions to Space Marines and also recruiting from Chogoris, the Khan created a foundation around which he planned to unite the 5th Legion. Additionally, the Primarch ordered the astropaths to summon all the companies scattered across the galaxy to his home world. He awaited his sons on Chogoris for about 10 standard years, during which most of the autonomous companies arrived. Nonetheless, many other divisions continued to emerge from the depths of the galaxy and joined the 5th Legion for about another 50 years. On the day when the Great Khan finally gathered his sons in the steppes of Chogoris, he saw warriors from hundreds of different worlds bearing the insignia of many divisions on their armor. Vanguard companies deemed it acceptable to recruit from planets conquered by other legions. They did not keep such activity a secret, but nor did they openly announce it, simply because they had little interest in others' opinions. But there were opinions. Leman Russ and Ferrus Manus were displeased that the 5th Legion was encroaching on the human resources of worlds brought into compliance by others. However, despite the protests of his brothers, Jaghatai Khan did not cease this practice, and all appeals to him on this matter were ignored. The Primarchs were dismayed by the Khan's disrespectful attitude and the silence of the Emperor. Over time, such opposition could develop into enmity. However, Horus, who had become a warrior, took notice of this issue and insisted that the companies of the 5th be not hindered from recruiting from worlds conquered by other Primarchs. Even before Jaghatai was found, Lupercal was the only one who truly appreciated the significance and utility of the scattered vanguard detachments across the galaxy. Astartes warriors gathered from different corners of the Imperium looked at each other with undisguised suspicion, and the only thing that united them was the genetic heritage of the Khan. That day, the 5th Legion received its name, the White Scars, referencing the famous established practice of facial scarification. Although Jaghatai himself told Sanguinius that the name was not devised by his sons, but by someone else. According to the Primarch, the Legion's name and the complex ritual in which a Space Marine first cuts his face and then adds poison to the wound to cheat the regeneration system were in no way related. The Great Khan unified the Legion through Chogorian culture, a mix of religious superstitions and practicality. Despite the obvious opposition of this worldview to imperial truth, and the fact that invocations of gods did not disappear from Jaghatai Khan's speech, the Legion was never subject to censure by the Emperor. This caused acute indignation in Lorgar and Robut Gilliman, but the father ignored their appeals, allowing Jaghatai to continue to nurture the Legionnaires in an atmosphere comfortable for the Primarch. The White Scars continued to act as the most decentralized forces, yielding in unusual management for the Imperium only to the sons of Alpharius. And yet Jaghatai understood that neither inflicting similar injuries on their faces nor changing their names upon joining the Legion could unite the Space Marines more strongly than joint battle. The Primarch led his sons, and the White Scars set off on a campaign for the first time as unified forces. The Great Khan decided to journey into the Kolan Circle, a remote system discovered by a company of pioneers several decades before finding their genetic father. For those who saw Jaghatai as an uneducated barbarian, the choice of direction for the first expedition might have seemed odd. The Kolan Circle was a collection of planets occupied by Xenos and human renegades, offering neither value nor resources, where even the most heroic victories would never be appreciated on Terra due to the system's remoteness and insignificance. However, he who soon earned the nickname the Warhawk was least interested in material rewards and adulation from the denizens of the Imperium. In his concept, the conditions in the Kolan Circle were to demonstrate to the Legionnaires that they couldn't defeat the enemy by fighting as separate companies, but would triumph if they started acting as a single legion. Jaghatai didn't aim to condition his warriors always to act together, since such a strategy was not close to him personally. He wanted to instill in the White Scars a collective spirit that spiritually united all his sons, and to show them the importance of being able to unite when necessary. Nonetheless, the campaign in the Kholan Circle turned out to be much harder than one could assume. Out of 80,000 Space Marines participating in the battles, every 10th perished. The Great Khan divided the White Scars into two, one that encircled the system and began the invasion from the outside, and the other that shot like an arrow towards the center. Moving towards each other, the halves of the Legion cleansed the Kholan Circle in 5 standard years. The Primarch led the assault in every battle in which he took part. Initially, the warriors followed the Khan because it was the duty of any Space Marine to obey the commands of their Gene Father. But over time, their motives changed. Seeing his wild bravery and splendid skill, as well as his fair and generous treatment of his sons, the legionnaires of the White Scars grew to love their Primarch. They were alien to the imperial truth and objectives pursued by the inscrutable Emperor. Jaghatai's warriors fought for him. Such loyalty was an example and a beacon. The White Scars were faithful to their father and each other, yet they carried out tasks beneficial to the Imperium. In those distant times, before history was shadowed by catastrophic betrayal, such sentiments in the Legion did not seem significant, as long as it was capable of effectively bringing worlds to compliance. Since the loyalty of the Primarch's sworn did not come into question, the Legionnaires' devotion to their genetic fathers was equated to devotion to the Emperor. Having triumphantly concluded the final battle in the Kholan Circle, Jaghatai Khan gained not only an entire conquered system with many inhabited worlds, but also a force forged in the flames of battle as one. The White Scars were no longer a barely noticeable shadow operating somewhere on the fringes of the galaxy. The Primarch directed his sons to the vanguard of the Great Crusade to begin fighting shoulder to shoulder with the Lord of Mankind. The last century of the 30th millennium marked the apex of glory for the Great Crusade, which united numerous remote corners of the galaxy under the dominion of the Imperium. Planets blazed, engulfed in fierce battles, and among the most ferocious legions, the White Scars proudly stood out. Many compared them to the brutal sons of Angron or the executioners of Lemon Russ. However, the records of Jaghatai Khan testify that each battle was thought through by him and unfolded according to strategy. Long planning and endless preparations for wars irritated the Warhawk, leading him often into conflicts with Rogel Dawn or Rabut Gilliman. Yet this did not mean the 5th Legion lacked its tactics. The sons of Jaghatai greatly valued knowledge and eagerly learned anew. Many of them possessed talents in philosophy and painting. The Primarch said gathering wisdom was akin to collecting weapons to unleash them upon the enemy's head at the right moment. The White Scars fought like the wind, being everywhere and nowhere simultaneously, yet they did not suffer from a lack of discipline, unlike the Space Wolves or the World Eaters. Throughout his service to the Imperium, the Great Khan remained devoted to Chogoris and did not strive to get close to the other Primarchs. Some brothers scorned him for his superstition and unique conduct in warfare, while others called him a barbarian. But it was hard to offend Jaghatai. Despite his nomad image, he always managed to respond to sarcasm with even more stinging words. Once the eternal rival of Khan, Fulgrim, in the presence of many brothers, noted that he had caught rumors from Mars, suggesting that the Primarch of the 5th Legion was doing some strange things with his ships. To which Jaghatai responded that he had heard Fulgrim was doing strange things with his warriors, and whatever the Great Khan implied, it enraged the Phoenician. According to the Primarch Sanguinius, only Perturabo could rival Jaghatai Khan in his ability to set his brothers against himself. Nevertheless, despite the defiance and lack of respect to other sons of the Emperor, Jaghatai still considered one of them, Magnus the Red, his true friend. Their warm relations played a key role in the outcome of the heresy that tore the Imperium of Man apart. The alliance of the White Scars, often misjudged as barbarians, and the Thousand Sons, the most educated warriors in the Imperium, puzzled many. The Primarchs shared a common disdain for the obligatory ceremonies that sometimes required being on the stifling terror, and the contempt directed at them both by other brothers. Jaghatai valued Magnus for his sincerity and willingness to always speak the truth, even under the threat of condemnation. The father of the Fifth Legion could not be accused of the same tender care for his appearance as that of Fulgrim the Phoenician, yet regardless of outsiders' slander, Jaghatai was no barbarian. Among his brothers, he was distinguished by a sleek and muscular physique, and additionally, he was the only Primarch to have openly expressed concern about losing his good physical shape. The Great Khan wore expensive clothing, gold ornaments on his fingers, neck, and in his hair, clearly caring about the impression he made on those around him. The image created in an enemy's mind was, according to Jaghatai, one of the instruments of victory. The Primarch did not strive to dispel the prejudices surrounding the Legion because he was convinced that strangers should be shown a mirror reflection of the truth, or even better, to maintain the enemy's erroneous views about themselves, feeding their expectations with morsels of incorrect information. For then any action becomes as unexpected to the enemy as thunder is in a clear sky. Swiftness and power were the chief distinguishing qualities of Jaghatai's forces. Despite numerous victories, the White Scars were considered outsiders among other participants of the Great Crusade, and their father did not strive to disperse the reputation of a brazen, rowdy and crazy killer who laughed with every deadly swing of his sword. Jaghatai looked down on ceremonies, rules and overly strict Primarchs such as Guilliman or Dawn. However, he warmly welcomed anyone who had the courage to pass through his ostensible barbaric insolence. Besides Magnus, only Horus, who easily found common ground with every brother, and Sanguinius, who saw primarily the virtues in the Emperor's sons, managed to do this. Despite their hermit image under the leadership of the Battlehawk, the White Scars sometimes fought alongside other forces. Over the centuries of the Great Crusade, the Fifth Legion fought shoulder to shoulder with the Ultramarines, Blood Angels, Emperor's Children, and Salamanders. And one of the fateful victories at the end of the 30th millennium, the sons of the Great Khan achieved together with the Death Guard and the Lunar Wolves. This was the battle on the planet Droon, a lone, arid world located near the Morpheus Rift. A difficult military campaign was anticipated, requiring the presence of almost the entire composition of 3 legions as well as their Primarchs. In the past, Droon was a thriving beacon of human civilization, but like many worlds scorched by the energy of the great ocean, it eventually ceased contact with the Imperium. A mere glance at the sources recounting the stages of that battle makes it clear that the Primarchs led the purification of the world, defiled by the demons of Nurgle. But in those glorious days, the truth about the Imperium was not yet unveiled, and the sons of the Emperor decided that Droon was occupied by particularly abhorrent Xenos. All 3 legions descended upon the capital of the world, assuming that the treacherous planet's aristocracy had hidden behind its walls. Horus decided to demonstrate the might of the defender of mankind by smashing the city's gates with a blow from his hammer. However, he was stopped by the Stormseer of the Fifth Legion, who expressed concerns about the breath of death lurking in the capital. Primarch Mortarion laughed at the words of the Psyker and Horus, having listened to his brother. Nevertheless, upon breaking the gates, an endless stream of rotting, bloated corpses poured forth onto the forces of the Imperium, threatening to overwhelm the legionnaires with their sheer numbers. The Stormseer, whom Lupercal had disregarded, turned to Jaghatai Khan, insisting on the unusual dangers emanating from the capital. Hearing his words, Mortarion turned them into another mockery of his brother. But Horus stopped the Lord of Death, stating that the approaching army of corpses was proof of the Psyker's correctness. At that moment, a whirlwind of deadly energy unfolded above the city, and the warriors of the 3 legions heard a scream emanating simultaneously from hundreds of thousands of dead throats. The Primarchs left the city before reuniting with their sons. At the General Council, the Stormseers declared that warp portals were located on the high hills surrounding the capital, somehow affecting the world's population. and the center of this deadly energy was in the city itself. Mortarion continued to insist that the monstrous events on the planet were caused by the actions of Xenos, and Horus agreed with him. However, the command of the offensive was entrusted to Jaghatai, who supported the opinion of his librarians. The purification of Druna took about 6 standard months, and according to sources, the success of the campaign was largely due to the specific battle strategy adopted by the 5th Legion. With the help of the Storm Seers, the White Scars learned the locations of those whom the forces of the Imperium designated as Xenos, and small autonomous groups of legionnaires quickly destroyed them. In addition, the librarians played a significant role in direct combat, as they could weaken the energy binding the corrupted humans to those who controlled them. By the time of the final battle, the entire planet was riddled with fissures shining with the power of the warp, and it was impossible to predict the outcome of that battle, if not for the presence of the Storm Seers among the Space Marines. In the place designated by the Psychers as the power center controlling the cursed world, there was a bloated Xenos of immense size, now identified as a demon of Nurgle. Its psychic power was so great that the 3 Primarchs couldn't even move near it at their usual speed. Additionally, the beast burned out the minds of dozens of librarians, brought Mortarion to his knees, and struck Horus with an energy so powerful that bloody tears flowed from the Primarch's eyes. But the great Khan, whom the Stormseer had concealed with their abilities, managed to approach the monster from behind and split its colossal body in 2, thereby saving the lives of Horus and Mortarion. Many historians wonder what future would have awaited the galaxy had Jaghatai been late. However, such speculations are pointless, for the warrior could simply not be late. The destroyed monster tore reality apart, dragging the Khan into a deadly vortex. Horus Lupercal held his brother by the hand and pulled him back, repaying him for saving his own life. With the death of the demon that had shrouded the planet, the warp portals snapped shut, and hundreds of millions of puppeteer-less corpses collapsed to the ground. The victory on Drune was so grandiose that after the triumph, those who had previously scorned the White Scars finally were able to appreciate their might. Yet the sons of Jaghatai treasured the story of another victory, known only to a few. This event entered the chronicle of the 5th Legion under the title Fall of the Pale Emperor. Not a single chronicler described that war in verse, nor did any Pict record those grim days. But the Space Marines of the White Scars remember this story whenever someone external doubts the Khan's cruelty hidden behind his smile. Each storyteller embellishes the narrative in their own way, attributing special successes to their own brotherhood, but even from such contradictory information, an important truth can be drawn. In the last years of the Great Crusade, Jaghatai Khan embarked on an expedition to the fringes of the Mandragora sector, taking with him only 5 battle companies. At the edge of known space, they encountered a human-populated system. These worlds had not regressed like many others. On the contrary, they were thriving, developing technologies only slightly inferior to Imperial standards. However, the White Scar's offer of peaceful compliance was rejected. The Primarch was not dismayed by this turn of events, even if his diplomatic talents did not lead to success. It's always pleasant to fight against a worthy opponent. The ships defending the system from the Great Khan's fleet were strong but not numerous. They fought valiantly, demonstrating experience accumulated over centuries of confrontation with hostile Xenos. Impressed by the skill of their enemies, Jaghatai ordered his warriors not to finish off the survivors and not to disrupt their retreat. After this, the Legion landed near the walls of one of the magnificent cities where the enemy army awaited them. Local nobility, like representatives of the Imperium, believed it wrong to destroy architectural wonders during battle. The White Scars easily won victory and again refrained from finishing off the survivors. Jaghatai Khan sent several of his trusted men into the city with the well-known proposal: join the realm of mankind or perish. In response, Imperial diplomats were returned in pieces and boxes. The Primarch was furious, not just because of the brazen reply and the death of those close to him. Now, He had to annihilate every human inhabiting the system, including the innocent and defenseless. Little in the galaxy displeased the father of the Fifth Legion as much, but the source of his anger was the realization that the rebels knew the hopelessness of their situation. They were preparing for death with their heads held high. The White Scars razed the magnificent city, slaughtered its populace, and scorched every planet in the system, finally reaching the castle of the Pale Emperor, where everything was destroyed, save for the ruler himself. Covered in blood, the Primarch burst into the hall to be met by the proud lord, who valued his throne more than his own people. The great Khan did not kill the Pale Emperor, but it was not out of mercy. On the contrary, he said he left the treacherous ruler alive as a reminder to others of what could happen to those who dare oppose the might of the Imperium. This concludes the official version of the story the White Scars sometimes share with outsiders. However, within the Legion, a completely different ending is remembered. In this version, the Primarch did not kill the Pale Emperor, saying that the ruler had chosen a fate that even Jaghatai himself had not dared to. The Khan declared that the annihilated system had preferred death to enslavement, something the Primarch himself had not managed to do. Thus, the ruler was left alive not as a reminder to others, but to Jaghatai himself about what could happen to those who dare to stand against the might of the Imperium. The White Scars played a significant role in the successful completion of the Ullanor Crusade, participating alongside the Ultramarines and Lunar Wolves. Together, the three legions managed to snatch victory from the largest orc gathering known at that time. This was later celebrated by the famous triumph at Ullanor, where the Emperor bestowed Horus with the title of War Master. Despite the difficulties of the battle, the warrior felt much more in his element, fighting the fierce Xenos, than at the ceremonial celebration in the festive pavilion. While other Primarchs enjoyed communing with their father, the Khan pondered who among his brothers the Emperor would entrust with the tedious but necessary task of returning hundreds of thousands of Space Marines from the festival back to their ships. However, despite his disdain for the ceremony, Jaghatai did not partake in the dispute when other Primarchs decided whether Lupercal was worthy of the War Master's role. Above all, the father of the White Scars considered Horus the only one among them who could competently direct the crusade in the Emperor's stead. Besides, unlike most Primarchs, the Khan had no desire for such a title for himself, as simply traversing the galaxy, joyfully slaughtering Xenos, was far more interesting. Furthermore, Jaghatai rarely engaged in verbal confrontation with any of his equals, preferring to silently observe the unfolding events and intervening only when absolutely necessary. On such occasions, one can recall the day when Horus and Alpharius attempted to stop the Sigillite, who was intent on destroying the statue of one of the lost Primarchs. Although Khan was dismayed by the demeaning attitude towards the memory of a fallen brother, and fully supported Horus, he did not enter into dispute with the Lord Regent. However, when the situation became critical and Lupercal was gasping for air, suspended by the Sigillite's psychic power, Khan rushed to Malcador, pleading to release his brother. He did not draw his sword nor strike the Lord Regent, but first asked politely, and when the Sigillite ignored his words, he yelled. The White Scar always remained loyal to Chogoris, and saw service to the Emperor as a compulsory tribute for the peaceful existence of his homeland. This did not prevent Keegan from enjoying wars across the galaxy, and satisfying his thirst for battle without disrupting the tranquil equilibrium that prevailed on the planet of nomads. However, the sentiments growing within the Imperium threatened to change the favourable order of warfare for the White Scars. Some Primarchs began to talk about the danger of using Psykers. Jaghatai did not pay attention to his brother's displeasure for a long time, believing they could do as they pleased within their legions. But Sanguinius explained to him all the dangers of such naive considerations. The great angel revealed to Khan two truths. The first, the opponents of Psykers won't stop with their sons. The second, if the imprudent Magnus's study of the Immaterium is not limited, the Crimson King will become a primary target for Mortarion or Russ. Khan was not worried about the future of his Stormseers. confident that they would not commit reckless actions when interacting with the warp. However, no one could say the same about the sons of Magnus. Thus, Jaghatai agreed to participate in the proposed Librarius by Sanguinius to personally oversee the drafting of rules. It was Khan who developed the structure and order used by the Legion's Psychers, although his name is not listed in any official list of drafters. But alas, neither the perceptive angel nor the wise Khan could foresee that their efforts, aimed not only at preserving the librarians but also at protecting the carefree brother, would be in vain. In the galaxy, there simply was no force capable of preventing the Crimson King and his sons from dealing with the Immaterium as they pleased. In difficult times, Jaghatai recalled the last conversation with his friend, which took place on Ulanor. Always sincere and forthright, Magnus for the first time tried to hide from his brother the anxiety that tormented him. The White Scar and the sons of Prospero on that day marched together and concluded many treaties, some of which are still hidden from imperial scholars. But Khan could not shake off the thought that Magnus, as a great scholar, was too detached from what was happening and refused to see the great danger emanating from the Primarchs planning to disband the librarians. Jaghatai felt that the reckoning for the Crimson King's gifts was imminent and would soon fall upon them. Magnus was sure that the Emperor would never turn away from Psychers, as the father himself was one of them. Still on Ulanor, barely having assumed the post of War Master, Horus commanded the White Scars to venture into the remote Kondak system to cleanse it of Xenos. It's hard to say whether it was part of the arch-traitor's insidious plan or merely a coincidence, but it was this that prevented Jaghatai from being personally present at the Council of Nicaea. The Chogorians had been using Psychers long before joining the Imperium. In doing so, adhere to strict rules, for everyone knew that too close an interaction with the warp could consume the soul. The principles brought from Chogoris thus became the foundation around which Jaghatai and his brothers created the Librarius. Magnus believed that every gifted individual deserved to have their psychic potential developed, but Sanguinius and Khan opposed him, saying that only space marines possessing sufficient self-discipline should wield the power. Chondax was distanced from the main regions of the Imperium not only by vast distances but also by severed communications. The White Scars spent 7 years cleansing the system, being in absolute ignorance of the events occurring in the realm of mankind. Chondax held no particular strategic value, and the entire mission was merely to clear a few desolate planets of Orc remnants. But Horus knew that the Khan would gladly embark on such a hunt. In the latter years of the Great Crusade, there was less and less territory left in the galaxy where the White Scars could fight as they liked. The Warhawk told himself that the day when he and his sons would find themselves outside the victorious Imperium was nearing, and it definitely troubled him. The calmer and more orderly the conquered regions became, the more often Khan thought about the White Scars being annihilated. Jaghatai felt that the moment of the great decision was approaching, in which he would either betray everything he had fought for in order to become what he once was, or remain in loyal oath, dooming himself and his sons to inevitable annihilation. Like the other great warriors, the Kagan feared almost nothing, but he was troubled by the prospect of becoming one of the weakened rulers who had lost their martial prowess. The Primarch's body was not prone to physical decline, but Jaghatai doubted that he would forever retain a sound mind. The War Master took advantage of the Khan's apprehension, sending the White Scars on a hunt to a distant part of the galaxy. This war became as emblematic for the Fifth Legion as the battle for Cygnus was for the Blood Angels. However, in the Kondak system, Jaghatai's sons were not alone. It's hard to say how much time it would have required for seasoned Greenskins hunters to completely clear the system of them. Directed by Horus, the Alpha Legion employed all its forces to sabotage the actions of the White Scars against the Orcs, manipulating the Xenos across the region like puppets. According to the arch-traitor's plan, distracted by a senseless hunt and deprived of contact with the Imperium, the Fifth Legion would be temporarily isolated from ongoing events and would partake in the rebellion against the Father, armed only with the knowledge granted by Horus. If Jaghatai had heard about the planned attack by the wolves on Prospero, then no force in the galaxy could have stopped him in his desire to help the Thousand Sons. This would have weakened 3 legions at once and would not have brought any advantage to the Lupercal. At the same time, the Space Wolves, blooded in battle with the Sons of Magnus, would have become easy prey for the enraged White Scars. Thus, Horus would not only have gotten rid of the Emperor's executioners, but also would have gained a powerful legion of allies. It was necessary only to sacrifice Prospero and Magnus, and then, at the right moment, send a message about this to isolated Chondax. As Horus assumed, Jaghatai's mind, clouded with anger, would without hesitation direct his sons towards the Wolf King. But the unfathomable Alpha Legion, at the crucial moment, opened the warp communication channels of the White Scars to 2 contradictory messages. In the first, Horus reported that the treacherous Leman Russ had destroyed Prospero and killed Magnus, for which the War Master ordered the Khan to punish the wolves. In the second, Rogel Dawn called Lupercal a traitor and urged the 5th Legion to urgently return to Terra along with the Space Wolves, who needed assistance in fighting the Sons of Alpharius. All these news seemed madness to the Kargan, yet he was little concerned about who the true traitor was. First and foremost, Jaghatai ordered the astropaths to find out if Magnus was alive. Khan considered his brother an incredibly powerful scholar who had mastered the great art of the heavens and penetrated beyond the veil of matter itself. If he indeed had fallen at the hands of Leman Russ, as Jaghatai feared, then the galaxy had changed. The father of the White Scars, in whose hands lay the fate of the entire Imperium at that moment, ignored both orders and neither headed to the wolves nor to Terra. As long as there was even the slightest chance to save Magnus, the Khan could not forsake it. The 5th Legion left the Chondax system without completing its purification and headed to Prospero. The sight of the sphere, charred to blackness, once the azure golden centre of knowledge, broke the Primarch's heart. Yet he did not abandon hope to find his brother, remembering some hidden caves once mentioned by the Crimson King. Having landed on the surface, the White Scars were shocked by the total destruction of everything that once made Tizca uniquely beautiful. Among the scorched ruins, not a single living soul remained, and yet some did not leave the planet. Cycnuine, giant deadly insects that were once the only scourge of Prospero, remained among the ruins as energy imprints. Having lost their flesh but not becoming any less dangerous for it, monsters attacked the Primarch and his sons. Fighting with Cycnuane, Kargan fell into a tunnel leading underground, but did not perceive this as a failure and forbade his warriors to follow him. It was there, in the depths of a fire-scorched underground hall, that Jaghatai Khan encountered Magnus the Red. The ghostly shard of the Crimson King looked and spoke exactly like the Primarch of the 15th Legion. However, now, in his words, there were tinges of melancholy and guilt. Nevertheless, Jaghatai himself blamed himself for what had happened to his friend. He believed that he was obliged to be present at Nicaea and prevent all the destructive consequences of the erroneous edict. However, Magnus disagreed. No matter how the paths of fate might be twisted, the end is the only thing that cannot be changed. The shard of the Crimson King convinced Kargan to make a decision and choose his side in the conflict tearing the Empire apart. Jaghatai, however, did not want to participate in this war. Horus was a traitor and the Emperor a tyrant, and neither could ensure a peaceful existence for Chogoris. The ghostly Magnus reproached Khan for the selfish indifference with which the brother had so strongly isolated himself that the Crimson King could not reach out to him when it was most needed. Of course, the impenetrable wall around Chondax was the doing of Horus, but silently embarking on a years-long hunt was entirely Jaghatai's own choice. There is an opinion that Magnus the Red could not have betrayed the Emperor because he was never fully convinced and acted solely in his own interests. The same can be said about Khan. The Warhawk always acted based on rational calculations of the most favourable outcomes for Chogoris and himself. One can only speculate what factors led him to side with the Imperium rather than Horus. But it is clear that the words of the Shard of Magnus, which pushed Jaghatai into the camp of the Loyalists, played a significant role in this. Kagan arrived on Prospero with the sole purpose of finding his friend, or a way to bring him back. The ghostly Crimson King resembled more a demon than a brother from the past, but still Jaghatai asked what he needed to do to bring back Magnus. The Shard tried to dissuade Khan, explaining that once regaining power he would destroy the galaxy with his vengeance. But Jaghatai could not just leave his friend as he had been made by Lemon Russ. Then the echo of the soul of the Master of Prospero decided to cease to exist. Raising his blade above the voluntarily frozen Magnus, Jaghatai promised that they would meet again under the light of stars. To which the ghost, knowing precisely how his friend would die, replied, "Sooner than you think." Destroying the Shard, the great Khan still could not move from his spot for a long time. It was clear to him who the traitor was in this tale. But the Chogorian truth that all emperors are liars also remained unchanged. Holding the blade in the empty cave, Jaghatai pondered that his father's dream had died. Contrary to many prejudices, Khan chose the side of the Imperium, but he did so in his unique manner. He knew that Horus had annihilated Prospero, using the wolves as naive puppets, yet he did not absolve Leman Russ of blame for the death of Magnus. Therefore, the White Scars chose not to assist the 6th Legion in fighting the Sons of Alpharius, and went to Terra, leaving the Space Wolves without reinforcements. Perhaps the reason Jaghatai Khan decided not to join Horus was also his meeting with Mortarion, who arrived at Prospero to persuade his brother to join the uprising. Despite the fact that the Nurgle-blessed Lord of the Death Guard appeared stronger to the Khan than ever before, the negative consequences of serving chaos were evident. However, on Terra, Khan also failed to find a truth worth fighting for. In his doubts, Malcador the Sigillite explained to the Primarch that truth is not constant. The Lord Regent knew that only after the battle for Terra, in which the lies of the traitors would clash with the lies of the Imperium, would that which will become truth for the next millennia be forged. Later, Khan would claim that he never believed in the ideals of the Emperor, for truth is as relative as righteousness, and in war the one who wins is right. During the Horus heresy, many Primarchs faced and successfully defeated the servants of chaos. But Jaghatai Khan managed not just to defeat a greater demon named Manusha Rakshasi, but did so with his bare hands, simply by strangling the servant of Slanesh. Khan remained an irreconcilable enemy of the creatures of the warp and the corrupted souls, but nobly commanded his space marines to bury the sons of Perturabo, fallen in battle with the White Scars. After the end of the heresy, the Lord Commander of the Imperium, Robut Gilliman, sent the 5th Legion to the Yasan system, which includes Chogoris. However, the long-awaited return home did not bring the Primarch the anticipated joy. In the absence of its defenders, the planet was attacked several times by the Drukhari. Jaghatai Khan fought against the Xenos for about 70 standard years after arriving in his home system, then disappeared under unknown circumstances. The White Scars believe that the Great Khan pursued the Drukhari into the Eldar Webway, where he hunts the Xenos to this day. It is highly likely that this is the case, and one day Khan will return to reunite his sons. But there are those who remember how the chief librarian of the 5th Legion was haunted until death by a dream in which Jaghatai Khan fought alone on a desert planet against a powerful creature, and then fell, struck down by a demonic blade.